Eli Campbell here. One thing that makes Steamboat special is how many awe-inspiring people call our valley home. You could find yourself in line at the coffee shop next to an Olympian, or sitting on the gondola next to the founder of a world-renowned business. Our community produces and attracts the best of the best in their respective fields, but most are so humble about it you would never know. These extraordinary people are the common folk in the boat. Welcome to Common Folk in the Boat. Eli Campbell here with you. Our podcast about impactful and influential people here in Steamboat Springs, presented by Billo Premium Cannabis and Paws and Claws. I am joined by someone that I have just looked up to as having a career in broadcasting myself locally for 20 years. National sportscaster and sports writer, Hall of Famer Verne Lundquist. How are you doing today?
Eli, I'm doing better that we're sitting down chatting.
Yeah, it's absolute, like I said, just amazing to have you in the studio here with me. You have had a career that I could only dream of, being able to be a sportscaster but also live in Steamboat Springs.
Yeah.
That said, I read that almost wasn't your life path. You almost went a whole different route following your dad as a Lutheran minister, and I can only imagine how powerful your voice would have been giving a sermon. However, broadcasting eventually drew you away from that. What was it about broadcasting and the microphone that drew you?
I graduated just a few years ago in 1962 from Texas Lutheran University, now was college then, with a major in sociology and a minor in history, which qualifies you to fill out a blue book. And that's about it. But my dad's church at that time was in Austin, Texas, which, for lack of going through all the permutations, I call home. And having grown up in a Lutheran minister's home, I was comfortable with it. And I had some long-range idea of combining my interest in the ministry with radio television. I had worked as a disc jockey at the local radio station, started out there, and I thought, well, why not? So I enrolled in the Lutheran School of Theology in Rock Island, Illinois, and I dedicated myself to giving it one full year. But I realized 6 weeks in that I didn't have what it took. I didn't have the commitment, the calling, whatever you want, however you want to describe it. I didn't have it. But I was determined to do one full year. So somewhere in microfilm, it registers that I have 6 hours of Greek, which hadn't been particularly helpful in the course of this long career. But I'd had this interest in radio television, and so while I was there, knowing that I wasn't going to return, I applied for a job in my hometown, and I was hired ultimately. I backtrack just a bit to help myself through school. I was working at WOC Radio in Davenport, Iowa, from 9 to midnight, and then getting up in the morning, and I helped pay the bills. I was on the kitchen crew, that kind of thing. I mean, we all struggled back then. And anyway, I was hired as a summer disc jockey at KTBC FM, when FM didn't mean anything back then. And I had the job summer of '63. And the man who hired me, I had told him that I was not going back to theological school. I would be curious about a sports shop. And the sports director whom I had grown up watching that summer took a job in Houston. So the job opened up, and I thought, ooh. And I was never a good athlete, but I loved competition. I loved writing. I wrote a column for the school newspaper, and I did public address announcing. Well, Cactus Pryor was this fellow's name, and he hired me, and I fell in love with it right away. And I was in Austin for 3 years. Long story. I spent 1 year out of sports in San Antonio, anchoring the 6 and 10 news. Got back into sports. I realized how much I missed it, and was lucky on my third try. I got a job as a sports director at WFAA TV in Dallas, and that was a top 10 market at the time. And then the biggest break I got, absolutely, if I've looked back over the whole career, was when I was asked to join the Dallas Cowboy Radio Network. First of all, as a pre and post game guy. Secondly, as the color commentator, and third, as the play-by-play guy. And I started the play-by-play job in 1972, 5 years after I got to Dallas, and that was the cornerstone for everything that happened.
Well, and I think you speak to it. You might not have been a great athlete yourself, but you were drawn to sports as a fan. And I think that's what really makes you so relatable in your delivery of a sports broadcast. And you've had the opportunity to call 20 different sports or more than that over your career, from football to golf to figure skating and everything in between. And what's amazing about sports is, as much as you can prepare for the event, know the players, know the team, even think you have an idea of how the game's going to play out, it's completely unpredictable. How much of what you have brought to your sports broadcast is preparedness, and how much of it is just an authentic reaction as a fan, being able to voice what all of us are thinking?
That's a really fascinating question, because it speaks to what we do. I mean, you have to. You do all the preparation, and there is a lot. I mean, I used to get comments from people who thought, well, you fly in a private plane on Friday afternoon, you do the game on Saturday, you fly back on your private plane. Not quite.
Yeah.
Not quite. But let's just take football, for example. And I did both the NFL and college football. You start on Monday. You start with the spotting board, and you memorize that. When I first moved here to Steamboat, I was doing the NFL, and I used to walk on the court trail, and they called me the whispering walker of the Apple Valley Court Trail, because I'd have my 3 deep, and I would write that out on Monday. And the 3 deep is I used one that was prepared by the late, he's not late, I'm sorry, Dick Vermeil, and it's you do 3 deep means on the top half you list the first, second, and third defenses of the Philadelphia Eagles. On the bottom half, the offense, first, second, and third. You flip it over, it's just the reverse, and you have a spotter who stands next to you and helps with binoculars and so on. And I used to memorize. I don't have a photographic memory, but I would walk and talk, and by the time I'd start at Fetcher Pond and get downtown to the bridge and walk back, I'd have it memorized. And you talk out loud. So I would whisper, and people come by on skates and so, what the heck?
I didn't know Verne Lundquist was crazy.
Yeah, he talks to himself. What is this all about? But by the time, and then you try to commit that to memory, and you need to do that. But you also have a spotter's help. So anyway, I did, and then all of us who are blessed to do this, to practice this craft, you go to an event and you hope that something memorable will break out in front of you, and then you pray that you're adequately equipped to verbally enhance that experience for the years. I've learned over the years, I don't pull for teams, despite what people at Alabama and Auburn think. I don't. You care about players and people, but most of all, you're hoping for a competitive event, and then you hope that you're adequately equipped to tell that story. We tell stories. The reason for storytelling, and yes, down distance, yardage is all important, but you tell stories about players or teams or cities or universities in order to get people interested, to give them a reason to care, and that's how you hook them in. And then you, if you're blessed, and more times than not, I've had great things break out in front of me. It's amazing. I look back, and I would say most of the times I've met the moment. Most of them. So.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, you sit there and you hope that something amazing will happen. You've been able to be a part of the voice for some incredibly iconic sports plays. You're wearing your Masters shirt there. Of course, Tiger Woods chip in on the 16th many years ago was one of those. And I remember, you may or may not remember this, I remember when I was working at KFMU probably about 15 years ago.
Okay.
You came into our studio and you had to recreate that event. And I don't know what the exact situation was. Maybe Nike was doing a commercial and they couldn't get the rights to the original audio or something like that.
Yeah.
And so you were having to recreate the event, and you were doing take after take after take in our studio. How difficult, and I don't know how often you've had to do that, but how difficult is it to recreate something that was originally just kind of part of the emotion of the event?
It's really a challenge because you don't have the enhancements. You don't have the reaction of the crowd or the players. It is a challenge. Now, I'm going to take myself way, 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 way back when baseball announcers used to have to recreate games from over a ticker tape. And God forbid there would be a rain delay, because then he fouls it off in the left field stands. Oh, is it pop up? No, it's in the stands behind the plate. and the late Bill Mercer, who he just passed away a month ago. He's 99, and Bill was the original Cowboys radio play-by-play guy when I went to work as the pregame postgame show. And Bill, ultimately, why I got that job is that Bill always wanted to be a Major League Baseball announcer. And when the Washington Senators became the Texas Rangers, Bill took that job, and Tex Schramm hired me to take his place. Anyway, Bill used to tell stories about rain delays, and to recreate, I don't like that at all.
Yeah. One of the other amazing sports moments that you've been a part of was the famous kick six. You mentioned Auburn and Alabama, and I went back and I rewatched that yesterday, knowing that I was going to be talking to you. And I think one of the most amazing parts about it is you knowing when not to speak. And as a broadcaster, especially coming from the radio background, we're taught that dead air is the worst thing that you can do. There was over 60 seconds of silence in that moment after the touchdown is scored. And I'm curious, how much of that is you being able to read the moment and understand this needs to marinate for the audience while the camera pans around and creates what's ultimately going to become memes across the internet? And how much of that is you kind of actually reacting in the moment saying, what did I just see? How do I say anything about this? This is unbelievable.
I think Eli, that it's the same with Tiger's chip. If that had been 35 years before that, I would have reacted completely differently. I think I had the discipline to know just shut up. My wife and I watch a lot of television, and I knew I spoke with Gary Danielson, my former SEC partner, and he's doing the Big Ten now. He said, well, how do you spend your Saturday afternoons? I said, I'm like millions of Americans, Gary. I sit at home on television, sit and just say, shut up, just quit talking. And it is a visual medium, and as opposed to radio. And I tell stories and speeches that I do all the time about you are the eyes and ears of the listener on radio. But on television, you dare not get outside of what they can see. And it's, you learn over the years. But I remember thinking to myself, our producer was a fellow named Craig Silver. The director was Steve Milton. Steve does all of our golf and our college football. And I remember Steve, when I show that clip in speeches, and I do a lot, I point out that Gary and I shut up for 1 minute and 21 seconds and let Steve conduct a symphonic orchestra, which he did. Yeah. Wide shot, tight shot, close up. The reaction of kids.
Lots of people with their hands on their heads.
It was amazing. Yeah. And I think, and to that play, I remember, because I've seen it 100 times, and I'm very proud of the way it went down. But when Chris Davis went in the end zone, I said, no flags. And for that fraction of a second, I looked back and I thought, dear God, don't let there be any flags. And there weren't, of course. But we laid out for 1:21. And I'm a good friend now of the official, the referee of that game is a guy named Matt Austin. And he was the guy. What they were trying to do is decide, they wanted to synchronize the game camera and the end zone camera. It took 7 minutes. And see if T.J. Yeldon, the running back for Alabama, had stepped out
Yep.
when time expired, or 1 second. And then Matt famously said, "Please put 1 second back." And Nick Saban was irritated, to put it mildly,
Yeah.
with the senior place kicker who had missed 3 or 4 and had 1 block, Cade Foster. So he put this redshirt freshman out there. And it was, as Gary said, it was a good kick. And then, but that's just, let me jump forward to when Rory won the Masters this year. And Jim Nance and Trevor Immelman were on the call. Jim and Trevor shut up for 6 minutes.
It's unbelievable.
It was extraordinary, and the discipline that took, and it was brilliant television, because they didn't talk over the moment, and people just. There's a famous story about my first executive producer of golf, named Frank Chirkinian, and my first ever tournament was in '83. I got hired at CBS from ABC. That's a long, long, long story, but. And Chirkinian said, he called me in his office. We did the Phoenix Open. He said, Lundquist, I've got you. We called him the Ayatollah. Partly out of respect, mostly out of fear. And he was a dandy, most profane human being I've ever met. And he said, I got 3 rules. This was at the Phoenix Open. And I knew now I was already I was going to do the Pebble Beach and the Colonial and Byron Nelson Colonial and Jack's tournament and Augusta. And he said, I got 3 rules. I never want to hear you mention your name on television. Nobody cares. They want to watch golf. Summerall will introduce you and then shut up. He said, number 2, don't you ever talk over a shot. Whatever editorial addition you have to make to the content of this telecast, you be quiet when the golfer, and don't talk over, and don't you predict where the shot's going to be. Let it. And anyway, and thirdly, and most important, don't state the obvious. If a guy makes a 3-foot putt, don't you ever say he made it. Well, I'll condense this story, but the guy involved was a guy named Rex Caldwell. He's on 16. I shut up, no name. He hits it up. He's 20 feet. He rolls it down. He's 2 off the lead. And I said, well, if you can make this, he'll be 1 back on Saturday with the 20 holes to play. He never touched the cup, to which I said, he missed it. And Chirkinian put down the all key, so Summerall, Venturi, Ben Wright, Tom Weisskopf, they could all hear him. And Frank said, you stupid Scandinavian SOB. If I tell you, don't tell me he made it, can you not deduce on your own to never tell me he missed it? Well, I learned. I never did it again.
Wow.
So lessons learned and applied.
Well, and you talk about lessons learned and how if certain things had happened 35 years ago, you would have called it differently just from what you've learned.
Sure.
I also think, too, you came through in a time where you've seen so much change in the broadcasting landscape.
Oh, wow.
And I'm curious, in your mind, with today's access for people to get up behind a microphone, whether it's social media, YouTube, podcasts, what we're doing here, do you think it's easier for someone to find their way because it's an easier access or entry point? Or is it more difficult because it's so oversaturated now with talent and people trying to find that space for themselves?
Well, I'm in the lucky position that people call me and they want to say, how do I get to do what you did? And I said, well, you don't start as an anchor at Sports Center. You don't do that. You start in Wichita. No, not that Wichita. Wichita Falls. And you do, and then if you're lucky and you get breaks and you aspire to something more, you hope that you get the breaks. But believe me, it's going to be a roller coaster. And but I do think this, Eli, that there's social media. I mean, I'm too damn old. I don't practice it. I don't have a Twitter, X account, whatever it is, True Social. I don't have Instagram. I made it to 84 without it, and so but I understand the pull of that. I've had friends of mine saying you got to get on Facebook. Well, I don't want to, and I know that there are advantages of it, but I'm just not a social media person. That's just me. But I understand the connectivity that it applies. I've done a lot of podcasts, so help me, I've never listened to one. How about that? I might listen to this one. Yeah. But that's just the old-fashioned nature of being born in 1940 and growing up in a completely different world. So,
yeah, and podcasts are kind of like the talk radio of 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. It's just more on demand, and there are so many more options out there. Now, going back to over the years, you had this incredible career in sports broadcasting, but one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about was here in the Yampa Valley in Steamboat. And I had seen that you kind of came to this valley like most of us. You came for the winter, you stayed for the summer. You came first as a skier, and then you played a golf tournament here, found out how incredible the summers are here, and ultimately thought this might be a place you would want to reside. What was that original draw of Steamboat back in the late 70s, early 80s to you?
Yes, I learned to ski here in March of 1971. Not to date myself, but there was a fellow who was a sales executive for Braniff Airlines. Now, you got to be a certain age to remember Braniff Airlines. And they were trying to market Colorado ski resorts. And so he called me and he said, we'll fly you and a photographer to this place called Steamboat Springs. And I thought, I'd be curious about it. And so they did, and my photographer is gone now. His name was Doug Freeman. And we flew into Stapleton, and Mix Beauvais, the late Mix Beauvais, who became a dear and trusted friend, Mix was director of marketing. And he picked us up, and we were in a white Chevy Suburban, and we went over Rabbit Pass in the whiteout, and we stayed. We were here for 4 days, and we stayed. And I did the interview. It was owned by Ling Temco Vought then, which is the Dallas-based conglomerate, and I have an interview. A photograph rather of myself, Billy Kidd, and Mix Beauvais taken in March of '71. That's in my office wall, 8 by 10. And I treasure that. Now, Billy himself didn't teach me. He ran the school.
Yeah.
But my teacher was a lady named Ronnie Conley, and she runs the the USO base in Guam now. And she comes back periodically. But I fell in love with Steamboat just then. And I thought, boy, this is really something. And then I came back for a golf tournament when they opened what is now Rolling Stone. It was the Sheraton Steamboat Resort. And I played the first round of golf. It was called the Thayer Cashua. Paul Thayer, chairman of LTV, Hank Cashua, World Pro Ski Champ. And I played in the first round with Moose Barrows, who became a dear, dear, dear friend of mine. Passed away a year ago. Yep. And I watched Moose get an eagle on 13. He holed out in the fairway. And that was in 75, I think. Yeah. And so they had arranged, Ling Temco Vought had arranged for me and my then wife, my former wife, to stay here for a week. And it was a pretty good deal because they had the lease on the Falcon Jet. And they flew us home. And I thought I could really get used to this. So my ex and I, in 78, we bought a condo, A-frame here, over on the other side of the mountain. And right where Après Ski and Alpenglow, where the Herbage is. Yep. We bought an A-frame there. And then Kathy and I split, and it was an amicable one in 1980. And Nancy and I met and married, and we married in 82. Now, she was a voice major at the University of Texas. We were living what might be described as an upper middle class lifestyle in Dallas, Texas. We had symphony season tickets, and opera and ballet and all that kind. And I took her to a ski ranch, a ski town, where ranchers were more important than skiers.
Yeah, and especially back then.
Yeah, it really was in 84. But I convinced her, and what turned life around for her and for me was Strings Music Festival. Yeah. We went to the very first one in 1988 on the deck at Storm Meadows, and Alyssa Green, who is now the chairman of the board, our CEO rather, Her dad played in that first night. Her dad, Ken Green, in the summer of '88. And Nancy and I became hooked in strings, and she introduced me to that kind of music, and it's become vital. I'm still on the Board of Regents. We got a meeting July 25th, I think, and it's very, very important to us. And and then Nance said, "Well, I think I'm going to kind of like this town," and now it's home. And for a number of years, we had a condo in Denver, and we would watch the weather religiously. And we sold the condo a year ago, but when I retired. But if it looked iffy, we're in the car, we drive down, and we're right at 16th and Larimer, and then we fly out of there. And so we were able to adapt. Why still? And Cherkinian said to me, "You're moving where, Frank?" The profane. I said, "I'm moving to Steamboat Springs, Colorado." He put his finger in my chest. He said, "You'll live in Steamboat until you miss your first adjective golf tournament." I said, "Okay, I understand." And I never missed one.
Did.
No.
Well, and I read, Jim Nance, I think he had the house in Pebble Beach.
Yes.
He's moved to Nashville because it was a very difficult place to get in and out of for him. And you were able to make it work, which is incredible. And you mentioned Alyssa Green, which, my own personal story with her is I waited tables with her 25 years ago here at a restaurant downtown, and it's been great to see what she's done at Strings and how she's been involved there. Like so many of us that moved here as, the service staff and then found our way to professional careers. You and your wife have given back so much to this community, whether it's Strings. Nancy was the Philanthropist of the Year back in 2012. And as much as you've given back to the community, I'm wondering how much has the community really given back to you and inspired you? Is there anything that you've taken from the community here that you've used in your professional life?
Well, living here enhances my soul. It is one of the most beautiful places in North America, I think. And I don't know how many times over 40. We moved here in '84. So 41 years. We've taken that drive from Denver and come around that curve, and all of a sudden Catamount Lake is down there, and it thrills my heart. It still does. It moves me. And it becomes, in a very real sense, a spiritual experience. And we've been in our current home since 1990, and we hoped that we could afford it when we bought it. And fortunately, things worked out, and we're on a cul-de-sac above the three egress routes, Voodoo, Simi, and Vogue, and we look directly at the mountain from our porch. So we turn to the right and look down valley, and it takes my breath away. It still does. And when we're gone, as we just were, I think I told you, we did a 3-week driving trip, and we saw parts of our country. Number one, you realize how beautiful our country is, but then to come home, and we went all the way, Arches National and Moab and Grand Canyon and Yosemite and Redwood Forest and all of that. But to come home, you go, oh boy, this is why we love living here, and. I've grown to love the diversity. We're a small town, 14,000, 15. South route, north route, 25,000. But the diversity of culture and people who live here is life enhancing. And we wouldn't go anywhere else.
And as successful as you've been, I think one of the reasons that you really fit in this community is it's a relatable, authentic community. It's not like a lot of ski towns where it's a lot of transient people. And, a lot of the ski towns in Colorado were mining towns, and people came and went. This was a ranching town, as you mentioned, and neighbors helping neighbors to get to where they could succeed before it was a ski resort, and that's always stayed true. But obviously, there's been a lot of change in the 40 years that you've lived here. Oh, golly. What would you like to say to the younger generations of Yampa Valley residents that really helped you find a home here that you'd like to see continue forward?
Well, it's if you're a young person, it's really expensive. And I think we realize that. We're blessed because we can afford to live here, but we know a number of working staff who live in Milner or Craig or Hayden, understand why. And I wish it wasn't, but think about, well, what our people have to pay compared to Aspen and Vale.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll share a story with you, and I mean no disrespect to Aspen or Vale, none. but there's a reporter. I won't mention his name. He's not my favorite person in the world, and he is the product of inherited wealth, and he does radio at Augusta every year. And I picked him up one year at Augusta and was driving. He said, "You live in where?" I said, "We live in Steamboat Springs." He said, "Why, for crying out loud? You could afford to live in Aspen or Vale." And I said, "Jim, because they're not Aspen or Vale." And we've been to both. We've skied both years ago, but they're not Steamboat.
Yeah.
And there's a soul here that you don't find. And no, this is it for us.
Yeah, and I think it's the same for a lot of people. We live here partially because it's not Aspen.
Yeah, that's right.
You know. Well, I do want to ask you, as we wrap up, you said you were on your 3-week road trip. Part of that was to film sections of some scenes in Happy Gilmore 2.
Yeah.
Going back to the original Happy
Right.
Gilmore back in 1996, I think it was, I had read that you were legitimately worried, that it might impact your career at being able to broadcast at the Masters. And it wasn't just paranoia. There had been some other reporters and broadcasters that had some similar fates of saying things that maybe were a little offensive to the sport of golf and were kind of banished from the hallowed grounds. And so I'm curious, I mean, now in current day news, being in an Adam Sandler movie might be the carrot that Derrick Henry's using to get 2,000 yards this year. But for you in 1996, why was that risk worth being in that movie?
Well, I was worried about it because in 96, I had left CBS and I had gone to TNT for 3 years because the money was great. And while we were filming Happy, the original choice was Pat Summerall to play the role I played. He had the same age as I did, a guy named Bob Rosen, who just passed away in February. And Bob had, and Pat, for whatever, when I got there and got the script, they had penciled out Pat Summerall and written my name on it. I thought, but I was worried that it was such a spoof that the sometimes stiff shirts at Augusta National would take offense. Now, ironically, Tin Cup, the Kevin Costner, was being filmed at the same time, and all the CBS guys were in that.
Yeah.
Well, here I was, the outcast, and I was in Happy Gilmore. Well, the funny thing is, when Happy Gilmore came out, we had laughingly decided, with the old Chief Theater downtown, we were going to have a Steamboat premiere, and we were going to have spotlights out in front, and Nance and I would pull up in an Alpine taxi and get out, and the movie never made it here. And the movie itself was not a hit until it went to VHS. Yeah. I mean, honest to God. And then USA Cable started televising it once a month, and it took off. And now, matter of fact, yesterday, mid-June, Nancy and I already got our official invitation to go back to New York for the world premiere on July 21st, and we're going to go. And I don't know if you've seen the trailer. The trailer's out. So while we were in Las Vegas, we did a segment. Excuse me, Eli. Yeah. And it's now out that Post Malone is a big. The first half of it is kind of a rehash of what. The second half is fantastic. It's so funny. It's a rehash of a send-up rather of Live Golf, and Post Malone is in it, and with I've got a picture on my cell phone of myself with Post Malone. I didn't know who he was. And I find out he's a really popular guy and a nice kid, 29 years old. So I've got a picture of Sandler, myself, Post Malone, and Jack Jaraputo, who's the guy to whom in the original I said, who the hell is Happy Gilmore? And Jack is now the executive producer of all of Adam Sandler. They were suite mates back in '96, and now he's the executive producer of all.
Yeah, I can't imagine that back in '96 when you did have that cameo, that you would have ever thought in a million years, 30 years later, you'd be reprising that role
Not
for
at
that
all.
movie.
Nancy and I were, excuse me, we were in New Jersey and New York back in November, and that's when we filmed my part of the second half, the second Happy Gilmore 2. I guess I can give this away because it's only a month away. But Scotty, every golfer you've ever heard of except Tiger Woods is in it, including Jack Nicklaus. I mean, when I found out Jack was in it, Nick Faldo's in it, Fred Couples. And I'll go ahead and give it away. Sue me. Scotty Scheffler's in it. He gets disqualified because he sucker punches his opponent on the first tee. And it's that kind of thing. And I cannot wait to see it.
It's going to be great. It's, and the golfers that are in it, the cameos of all natures of pop culture. It's a power that only Adam Sandler can really bring. And so it's really amazing. And just, again, I'm so excited that you came and spent some time with us. As I said, you're a Hall of Famer. You've had all of these accolades, but in the end, you're really just one of the common folk of the boat, and that's why I appreciate you spending some time with us today.
Well, it's been a pleasure, Eli. Thank you so much for the invitation.